Our main presenter is not just a talented writer, but a gifted speaker as well, which is kind of why we invited him. He has spoken in many important venues, such as the National Prayer Breakfast, CPAC, and in front of Congress. Along with his colleague, John Stonestreet, he is the voice of Breakpoint, a radio commentary that is broadcast on 1,400 radio outlets with an audience of 8 million. He is the host of the Eric Metaxas Show, a daily radio program and podcast nationally syndicated in 120 cities, as well as Socrates in the City, Conversation on the Examined Life, which is broadcast on the National Religious Broadcasters Network and at SocratesInTheCity.com. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to the man who has a jar of peanut butter, and he's not afraid to use it, Eric Metaxas!
Honored by that I'm embarrassed. Now listen, that is very sweet of you. Don't do that. Don't do that because you don't know what I'm going to say. You'll get in trouble. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you. You may be seated, but I'd prefer if you stood. I really would. No, honestly, I just want to be blunt. I'm very honored by this. And most of you, in greeting me, you're far too deferential. Trust me when I tell you how honored I am to be here, to be invited here. As many of you know, the people coming in now are late. Don't look at them. They'll be very embarrassed. They have their reasons. That's between them and their God. But, you know, my wife knows that my love language is teasing people publicly, right? So if I make fun of you publicly, you know, that's a compliment. That's the 6th love language. You know the book 5 Love Languages? Yeah, that's wrong. There's 6. That book's out of date. And the 6th love language is Don Rickles and I really are the only people I know who identify that way. But I love teasing people. I think I got that from my mom, who is in Danbury taking care of our dog, Georgie. I grew up in Danbury, Connecticut. Danbury is my hometown. And when I was invited to speak in Connecticut, I promise you that it was not convenient for me to be here today. But I also want you to know that I'm here because I am honored that there are people in Connecticut who care about the things that I care about, who love America, who understand some of these things and who need to be encouraged. And Mark, who just spoke, obviously is a rhino. He drank the Kool-Aid, but it's a big tent, so we're gonna let you and Nikki Haley remain in the tent, but we'll let you remain longer. The main thing that I want to talk about today is really at the heart of the book that I wrote, which is called "If You Can Keep It." The Forgotten Promise of American Liberty, right? Now, I want to encourage all of you, I don't write my books to make money, and they contain things that I wish I could give them free to everybody, because I feel like when we know our history, it changes everything. You can't unknow it once you know it, but most of us in this room have grown up in a time where you weren't taught your history. And we've grown up in a secular world, and that the world of America that began to disappear in the 60s and the 70s, and that most people are, when it comes to civics and when it comes to history, they're basically illiterate. And obviously, when people are ignorant and illiterate in that sense, you can manipulate them. And you can tell them really stupid things, and they don't say that's stupid. They go, oh, interesting. Somebody else just said that. Must be true. So it's vital for us to understand our history as Americans. And the funny thing is, I'm always happy to give credit where it's due. The book, If You Can Keep It, was inspired because I read a book by a very dear friend of mine, Os Guinness. Some of you will be familiar with him. But he wrote a book called A Free People's Suicide. And in that book, he mentions many things that I didn't know. And I'm always very happy to say, and I really mean this, how ignorant I am. So people think, because I graduated from Yale, or because I write these books that I knew all this stuff and now I'm putting this into books. I promise you that in about every single book that I've written, I didn't know much about the subject. I knew just enough to get into the trouble of saying I'm going to write a book about it. And then I started to write the book about it. And as you're writing the book, you learn these things. And when I learned many of the things that I learned, I'm so shocked that I didn't know it before. And so I have a passion to communicate it to everyone I can communicate it to. If you have money, buy several copies of my books, buy them online, buy them from my website, give them to people and say, you got to read this. Because it changes things when people know the truth. You know that. And we know that part of what we're dealing with right now is a lot of people don't know the truth. And, so this book, if you can keep it, I didn't know most of what's in it until I started doing the research. And I read the book by Os Guinness, and he talks about a number of things. And what's funny is Oz, if you know him, he's English, right? If you don't know him, he's Hungarian. But he's English, and the English are famously diffident, shy, So he writes this book, and the stuff in it like punches me in the face. Like, this is insane, amazing stuff, what he's saying. But he's so shy about it that he didn't really push it out there enough, in my opinion, right? And I said, these ideas are just, I don't know how to put it, they're utterly central to what it is to be an American. I didn't know this. I'm ashamed I didn't know it. And it's now my passion to communicate this. And so I did in writing the book. And I want to just go over this in my talk, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. I'm here for as long as, I don't need to take a rest or anything or whatever. And I'm really I want to say again how honored I am to be invited here. Deeply honored. Anytime there's something going on in New England, and especially in Connecticut, if I can be there, I will be there, because I know what you all are facing here and the battle that you fight. And I want to say God bless you from the bottom of my heart, and thank you for your sacrifices. So the book title I mentioned, If You Can Keep It. As some of you people will know where that phrase comes from, but in case you don't, I'll remind you, because I'm not going to pretend that I knew. Again, everybody thinks, oh, Eric knows this stuff. Don't flatter me, okay? I know a few things. There's a lot I don't know. And I grew up, as I say, like with many of you, at a time when we weren't taught these things in public schools, even decent public schools like Danbury, Connecticut in the 70s. I don't know that this was ever covered, or if I would have remembered it years later. But let's go back to the scene where I get the title, If You Can Keep It. And because it's very instructive, and obviously this is all in the book, but think about this. Think about the fact that we go to war in 1775, right? We take up arms against tyranny. Now, we're not there yet, but sometimes the thing that God would tell you to do is to take up arms against tyranny, right? Now, you got to be very careful. Don't say that publicly. Don't, because you'll be labeled an insurrectionist. Let me tell you something. If we had an actual insurrection, we wouldn't be where we are today. What a joke that they called, people taking selfies an insurrection. What a preposterous joke. And we're only beginning to scratch the surface of getting to the beginning of what happened there, what happened with COVID, whatever. All this stuff is coming out, and if you follow me in my radio program and in other venues, I talk to all kinds of people about this, because getting the truth out is the most important thing. And a lot of people don't want to believe this stuff because it's very painful to believe that in your own country these things could be happening. But by the grace of God, the truth will come out and out and out. But it began in 1775. I mean, we can go back and back and back. In 1776, of course, we officially declare that we are a new nation. We fight the British. We win in 83, 81, depends on how you want to score the game, I don't know. But the point is, and this is where I always find there's always truth, there's always humor in truth. Our federal government was so weak, can you imagine that? That we needed to go back to the drawing board in 1787, and we needed to figure out, is it possible to form a government that is strong enough but not too strong, where people would be able to govern themselves, right? And the first thing we have to say is self-government had really never been done in the history of the world before, okay? Now the Greeks, I'm Greek, George Saris is Greek, his wife is not Greek, she married a Greek. My wife is not Greek, she married a Greek, but technically they've been grafted in, George, they've been grafted in. But the Greeks will say, oh, we invented democracy, whatever. Well, let me, speaking as a Greek who is extremely proud to be Greek, and by the way, if you're not proud of where you're from, you're an idiot, right? I don't care, even if you're French. I don't care where you're from. God has created everyone in His image, and every culture has a piece of who He is, and every culture also has particular temptations and flaws and whatever. But the Greeks are famously proud of being Greek because we actually know we're the best nationality. We're not ashamed of that. So, but the Greeks always say, we say, oh, the Greeks, they're democracy. Well, look, what they had was like a flicker for a few decades in small city-states, okay? So it's an impressive thing, but it was not what we inaugurated in 1776 and in this nation. What happened in this nation is something that never in the history of the world had happened before. And what I try to say in the book, if you can keep it, is that we need to recover our astonishment at this miracle that happened in history. A miracle of self-government. And you want to say, how did it happen? There are many antecedents and things that have to come together in order for people in the history of the world to get to a place where they can think they could govern themselves, right? And so I write about that a little bit in my Luther biography, but there's all kinds of things in history that kind of made it possible. But it happens, and then, as I said, in 1787, the founding fathers, or most of them, go back to the drawing board in Philadelphia, Independence Hall, to see if they can create a constitution, because things weren't working so well up until then, because they needed some sense of a federal government, something. So they go back to the drawing board, and again, if you know that story, this is how you see God's hand in history. If you don't see God's hand in history, you're looking away, because there's sometimes when there's no, it's like an algebra, you're solving for x. There's no other explanation. It's x equals God. God, I don't know how you get the United States of America apart from God. If you have some Enlightenment day, French Enlightenment view of how this happened, whatever, I think you're wrong. You're not looking at you might not like it, but the fact of the matter is, none of it should have happened. We never should have won the war. How many of you understand? We never should have won the war. Over and over and over again, you see God's miraculous hand, or if you don't see it as God's miraculous hand, you just think it's luck. That's really stupid. But the fact is that then you get to 1787, and if you're not aware of the miracles that have led up to that, you now have a bunch of people and a bunch of states that believe in slavery gathering together in a room to figure out, oh, hey, can we come together and create a constitution? We all know by definition that never should have happened. Yeah. So we do not deserve to have the United States of America. It's an insane miracle enabled by God. And in 1787, they basically managed, because I'm not going to tell that story, I don't know it well enough, but they managed. I think most of them, including people we think of as deists, not really as Christians, like Benjamin Franklin, they acknowledged the hand of providence, capital P, right? Now, when they said providence, we know they're referring to the God of the Bible. They were just being 18th century, right? And they said, we're not sure how this happened, but it's weird that it happened, but it happened. And you have Benjamin Franklin, okay, by the way, whoever's calling, if that's my wife, I'm not here. She doesn't know I do this stuff. So, imagine Don't you want to know who it is? Put him on speaker. Yeah, put him on speaker. I know. You know, cell phones are a new thing. People forget they need to turn them off. It's a new thing. It's just a fad. So basically, Benjamin Franklin asks for prayer in the Constitutional Convention. You don't think of Franklin as the kind of guy who would ask for prayer. But the least religious of the founders, by today's standards, are extremely religious. That's unavoidable history. You don't need to like it, you know, but that's unavoidable. So he asked for prayer. In the end, they prevail. They create the Constitution, which never should have happened. And Franklin, as he is leaving the convention, right, they called him the sage of the Constitution. He was the oldest member. He was, what, 81 or so at that point. He leaves, and someone asks him, Mrs. Powell of Philadelphia, long story, she says, Dr. Franklin, what have you given us, a monarchy or a republic? Now, you have to understand, that question, I remember thinking that's so cute, right? It's like a joke question. Have you given us a monarchy or a republic? The reality is, no one in the history of the world had ever created a real republic. So can you imagine that the people that were not privy to what's going on in that room in Independence Hall, they're wondering, were you able to pull it off? What had never been done in the history of the universe? They didn't know. Maybe they would come out and say, you know what, we couldn't get it together with South Carolina, you know, they're racist scum, and we don't think slavery is good, so now, they could have had a million excuses of why they didn't pull it off. Somehow, by the grace of God, they pull it off, and they managed to create a republic, self-government in America, right? So this woman, Mrs. Powell of Philadelphia, a famous woman, asks, what have you given us, a monarchy or a republic? And Franklin says, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. Now, I always thought that's kind of a cheeky Franklin, you know, he's the Yankee wit, and he comes up with this, republic if you can keep it, you know. But the profundity of what he said off the cuff is, yes, we've created a republic, but also I, Benjamin Franklin, am aware of the insane fragility of what we've pulled off. And when he says, if you can keep it, which is the title of the book, if you can keep it, the whole point is, what it says in the Constitution is utterly irrelevant. Those are dead words on a page. They don't do anything. They don't keep themselves, right? If you can keep it means we, the people, are obliged somehow to keep the republic, to govern ourselves. And this is the central irony at the heart of self-government and liberty, right? Is you cannot enforce liberty, right? You can't make a law making people free. Because if you're free by a law, the freedom is coerced, which is not freedom. In other words, there's a conundrum at the heart of the concept of self-government that we can acknowledge that we're free, we're given these rights from God, and we can put it in a piece of paper, but we, the people, have to keep the republic. So the question is, what does that mean? What did Franklin mean when, 3 years from his death, he says, if you can keep it. He had no idea what the future would hold. Would this fall apart in 10 years or 20 or 50? He didn't know. So he says, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. And so the question whether we can keep it, of course, is how does one keep the republic? How do you preserve freedom? You win the freedom from the British. Now what do you do with it? The dog that caught the car. What do you do? Right? You're thinking about catching the car, you catch the car, now what? So, it was in Os Guinness's book, and obviously I reprise all of this in my book, to sort of explain what it is. And in order to explain this, he employs something Oz calls it the Golden Triangle of Freedom. And the Golden Triangle of Freedom is Os Guinness's invention, right? But again, being a diffident British man, he says, oh, all the founders understood this concept. Yes, Oz, but they didn't come up with the term the Golden Triangle. They didn't spell this out, even though theoretically they understood it. Os Guinness came up with this, and he's so shy about it that I had to write a whole book about it, underscoring this idea so that we could all understand how this works. Because how this works, again, when I understood this, I was so amazed. I was really amazed by it. And I'll describe the Golden Triangle of Freedom briefly, and then I'll explain it. But basically, the Golden Triangle of Freedom is that freedom, which can also be called liberty, which can also be called self-government, right? You gotta understand that concept. Liberty means I am free to govern myself. Nobody is governing me. I'm not being governed by a tyrant, by a king, by a bureaucracy, by a deep state. I am governing myself. We are governing ourselves, right? That's called liberty, okay? Freedom, that thing we call freedom or liberty or self-government, requires virtue. That's the first leg of the triangle. Freedom requires virtue. All of the founders understood that. Virtue, they say, requires faith, but then faith in turn requires freedom, and round it goes. Okay, what does this mean? Well, it means that self-government, freedom to govern ourselves, to not be governed from above or from without, or means I have to govern myself. How does that work? In other words, if there's not somebody with a gun forcing me to do the right thing, forcing me not to steal, forcing me to pay my taxes, if I'm forced to do these things, I'm not free. So for me to do it myself, why would I do it myself if I'm not forced? Well, all the founders understood, and they wrote about it. Every single one of them wrote about it, and I quote them at length in the book. They understood that unless you have people with virtue, this can't work. In other words, if you do the right thing when nobody's looking, that's called virtue. If nobody's forcing you to do the right thing, but you do it anyway, that's because you have virtue, what they call virtue. Now, every one of the founders understood this concept, that you can't have freedom without virtue. Now, do we talk about this in the public schools today? Do we talk about this anywhere in the culture? We forgot the idea, and this is like math. It's kind of like, we forgot 1 + 1 = 2, but we're gonna carry on anyway. Well, your bridges are gonna fall down, right? Your buildings are gonna fall down. You need to know that this is like a math thing, okay? You cannot have self-government without virtue. Now again, virtue is by definition not force. This is people freely doing the right thing. Every one of the founders knew that if you don't have a virtuous citizenry, and again, that doesn't mean everyone's going to be virtuous, but if you don't have a culture of virtue, you can't have self-government, period, done. We need to understand this like we understand 1 + 1 = 2. There's no way you can process what we call liberty, if you really understand what liberty is, apart from virtue. People doing the right thing, okay? So the founders said, freedom requires virtue. But then they said, virtue requires faith. What does that mean? Well, it can mean a number of things, but in a nutshell, what it means is that, why will I do the virtuous thing? Because I have faith in some higher power or some higher order to which I answer. I don't answer to the bayonet or the gun. I do it because I believe it's the right thing to do, and I fear God more than I fear whatever tyrant. I'm going to not steal because God says not to steal, right? I'm not going to commit adultery or commit whatever. I'm not going to do these things because of my faith in God. Now, it doesn't need to be the faith in the God of the Bible. It could be, the faith in the classical virtue. It could be some confused idea of faith, but it's always faith in some higher order. And the founders knew that in the overwhelming majority of the cases, it was faith in the God of the Bible. And Benjamin Franklin, who was friends with George Whitefield, the famous evangelist, they all observed that when faith breaks out in a community, when you see revival, like you did in Enfield, Connecticut, and when you saw up and down the Tobacco Valley, right here, when faith breaks out, I write in my book the story of George Whitefield preaching in Middletown, Connecticut. That actually happened right here. It happened. And people drove their wagons and horses for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles around to hear George Whitefield talk. And what did George Whitefield have to say? Well, at the heart of his message is the most simple Christian message there is. You must be born again, right? Now, what does that mean? What it means is you have to have an actual relationship with the God of the Bible. It's not an intellectual assent to these ideas are good ideas, because lots of people can have that without actual faith in the God of the Bible, right? Now, whether Franklin had that or didn't is another issue. But the point is, Franklin saw that wherever revival broke out, up and down the 13 colonies, because George Whitefield, as evangelist, is preaching up and down the 13 colonies day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. Wherever a revival breaks out and people get all crazy about God, crime goes down. Domestic abuse goes down. All of these good things go up. Virtue goes up. And all the founders understood that when you have religious people, you have virtue. And you have the possibility of self-government. Because these people believe in a higher power, and they say, we fear God. And that's why I do this and this and this and this, because I'm serving God. I don't need a government to tell me what to do. And by the way, I won't let government tell me what to do, because my fidelity is to God. So this was a new thing in history. And in the 18th century, because the preaching of George Whitefield, principally, there was revival and revival. So the founders saw this, and it became part of the warp and woof of American colonial life, that if your fidelity is to God, if I have a direct link to the God of the Bible, what do I need a king for? What do I need whatever? We are all the king and the governor and the magistrate. We are all under God's authority. Now this is basic biblical thinking, right? But it came alive in a new way here in the colonies, and people began to think, well, if I can have a direct relationship with God, then I'm going to want to elect people who also think the way that I do, because they need to understand that they're under God's authority. They have to obey the same laws and the same truth and the same whatever. That's called equality. That's called freedom. That's all the things that we kind of take for granted now, which have been cannibalized by, you know, the Marxist left, all the virtue signaling about these values. All of it comes out of the Bible. And so you basically have people understanding this concept. So all of the founders understood that freedom requires virtue, virtue requires faith. Now when I say requires faith, this is the third part of the leg, the third leg of the triangle. Freedom requires virtue, virtue requires faith, faith in turn requires freedom. In other words, the government can't say, hey, we figured out the formula. We're going to force everybody to go to church. We're going to force everybody to read the Bible. We're going to coerce faith. No. The only real faith is not that kind of faith. Because they had plenty of that in the old country, right? All over Europe, there were kings and people telling people, you have to go to this church, you have to do that, and you have to da-da-da-da-da. And they said, no, that doesn't work. It's immoral. We need to be able to choose our own faith or lack of faith, whatever it is, needs to be 100% free. But the founders also knew that when it's free, then people are free to choose the right thing for themselves, not because they're being forced or because they can get something out of it, but they're going to say, we just think this is right, so we're going to go to that church because we feel like it. We feel that we're hearing truth there, not because the government says that's your church. So this was at the heart of American liberty, this understanding that you have to have a virtuous population, but virtue tends to come from faith, but faith has to be free. So we have to have religious liberty. We cannot say, even though we did a little bit in the early years of this republic, that, if you're in Connecticut, you're a Congregationalist, if you're whatever. It took some time, but we finally figured out that people need to be 100% free to choose whether they go to church, when they go to church, how they go to church, whether they go to mosque, whether they go to synagogue, whatever. That has to be enshrined as something that is free. The government has no business telling people on these really sacred issues of what to do or how to do it, whatever. So at the heart of all of this, of course, is the government having faith that the people will do the right thing, right? In other words, or it's a republic if you can keep it. There's nothing the government can do, by definition, to enforce freedom. Enforced freedom is no freedom. So Franklin, when he says to Mrs. Powell, a republic, madam, if you can keep it, he understood that you might not be able to keep it. Because if you can't force it, how do you continue this? How does that work? Well, how it works is we teach these ideas to our children and to each other, and we remind ourselves over and over and over that God and virtue are central, and that if we forget God or we push God out, even if you're an atheist or an agnostic, you have to acknowledge there's no other way to get there. You have to say, I mean, people that I know who don't share my faith nonetheless understand this, that this is the only way you can have genuine freedom. So all of the founders understood these ideas, and they said that we have to promote these things in our own circles, but we can't force them. So it falls to us, to we the people, to keep the republic. And if we don't, it goes away. And so you understand that this is something that we did a pretty good job of for about 2 centuries. And then I think, you know, in the 60s and 70s, a new narrative kind of crept in, right? Now we know you can trace these things back forever to the Garden of Eden. We don't want to go crazy here, but the point is that, you know, wicked ideas have been around since human beings left the garden, which is, you know, kind of a while ago. But the idea of freedom, the idea of all of these things were not, they've been challenged throughout our history. And again, the more you know of our history, the more you understand how checkered it is and how many evil people and evil forces tried to undo what the founders did, and how it's a perpetual battle. This is not a battle that you finally win and it's over. Every one of us has to fight this battle, and we are fighting it this morning. This is what we do. We fight these battles because once we cease to fight these battles, we devolve to the default mode, which is slavery, which is some kind of bondage to some kind of power. That's the normal state. But God calls us not to live in the normal, natural state. He calls us to a supernatural thing, to govern ourselves, to look to Him, or to at least acknowledge that that was the founders' vision of liberty, and to say that we don't know how else to get that done. There's no other way you can have liberty unless people have virtue, and people are going to have virtue because they have some kind of faith, but you can't force the faith, so you got to do what you can. So, at the end of it all, we recognize, as I said, that a narrative crept in the 60s, and when I say crept in the 60s, I want to say again, you know, it had been creeping in all along, but sometimes things have some more purchase in the culture, right? Because, you know, you can trace these bad ideas, these anti-American, anti-biblical ideas back and back and back. They've always been there among the cultural elites. That's when you hiss. Cultural elites. Right? But the cultural elites, the arrogant cultural elites, look, all you need to do is look at the history of the French Revolution, okay? Much of that was a satanic bloodbath. So when people celebrate Bastille Day, I'm sorry, they're idiots, okay? It was butchery, and, I mean, it was satanic. It's, you know, the satanic was not invented a few years ago. It goes all the way back. But when you look at the difference between the French Revolution and the American Revolution, and Os Guinness has written about this in several books. By the way, I interviewed him at Socrates in the City. If you're not familiar, I do this thing called Socrates in the City. Please write it down and go to the website, socratesinthecity.com. We have these periodic events, usually in Manhattan. And most recently, I interviewed Os Guinness about a lot of what we're discussing here, and I recommend it to you. You can watch it on YouTube for free. Just send me a check when you get around to it. But the fact is that that concept of understanding, if you really understand what the American Revolution was, and what American liberty is, and how it's founded on faith and virtue, again, if you don't get that, it might trouble you. You might say, well, I don't understand this. Well, what's the difference between the French and the... Well, again, you know, we have a checkered history in this country, but we don't double down on the checkered part of it, right? We don't say, yeah, we had slavery, so what? We say, yes, and we repented of that, and we bled and bled and died and died and died, and we abolished slavery because it was a satanic thing. and we needed to expunge it. And by the grace of God, we did. But it was usually born-again Christians, fanatical hotheads, like the man who spoke before me. People like that who are the ones to say, oh, racism is wrong, slavery is wrong. But where did they get that idea from? From the BLM gang? No, they got it from the Bible. And they said, it's time we dealt with this. And it's time. And they fought. And they fought that battle for abolition. And by the grace of God, they won. Some of you know my book on William Wilberforce, Amazing Grace. He led the battle in Britain, but why did he do it? Because of his faith in Jesus. Because he was an evangelical fanatic like me. Because all the other people said, well, I'm a member of the Church of England. They didn't give a damn about the slave trade. Okay, so if you want to know somebody's actual Christian, ask yourself, do they give them a damn? Do they give a damn about evil? About human beings being treated like that? And the slave trade and American slavery is just one small example of the evil in the world that's happening while we're having this nice meeting here. There's evil in the world. And if you care about strangers suffering, well, that's the heart of God. You're supposed to care about that. And there are a lot of people who don't. And you know that and I know that. They don't care. And so America traditionally has cared about those things. And we have worked those things out over the decades. So when you talk about what was the French Revolution, what was the difference ultimately comes down to when I talk about the Golden Triangle of Freedom. Tocqueville, when he comes here, and obviously, again, I write about this in the book, but Tocqueville comes here 50 years after our founding, and he looks around. Don't look at that guy, he's late. He looks around and he says, what is happening in America? Why do you have churches bolstering freedom? Faith seems to bolster freedom. In France, the churches are at war with freedom, or those who believe in freedom are at war with the churches. What is the difference? And that's when he understands, you don't have an established religion. You have freedom of religion. People don't have to go to church. You don't have to be a Catholic or a Congregationalist or a Protestant. You don't have to do anything. It's totally free. And when it's free, they bolster each other. Again, this is the irony and the conundrum at the heart of American liberty. It had never existed in the history of the world. And so in France, they got it completely wrong. And, it's not like they got it a little bit wrong. They got it really so wrong. It's one thing to say, the monarch is evil and cruel. It's another thing to be evil and cruel yourself as you oppose the monarch. Yeah. We're supposed to find that other way, right? We're supposed to not be evil and cruel. They couldn't figure it out in France. And they still have their issues over there, but we're not going to get into that right now. How many people believe that Macron is the Antichrist? Anybody? I'm just curious. I'm taking even odds on that. But the point is that if you don't understand the difference between the French Revolution, the American Revolution, what they did and what they have. So that was 200 plus years ago, right? 230 years ago that the French tried to do what they did. And then you can trace the history of, again, it's not just that they were hostile to the church. At the end of the day, a lot of that was satanic and anti-God in a way that's really gross and creepy, right? It was very sexual. It's very, very sick. When you look at it, it's kind of fascinating in a way. You say, I think things just got sick in the 60s. No. You go way back. You can go back farther than that. But the point is that you see this going through the 19th century, right? You see these different forces at battle constantly, right? When Darwin writes The Origin of Species in 1859, he was only giving like a scientific reason, so-called, to the godlessness. He was only saying, we don't need God, we've kind of figured out how we got here without God, so next, right? But a lot of people were already, hostile to the idea of God. And this creeps through and creeps through and creeps through. Of course, you have the Russian Revolution, and when you see, I wrote a book called Is Atheism Dead?, where I talk about the evidence for God from science today, which is mind-blowing stuff. I beg you to read it because you'll be shocked at how science points to the existence of God. Even if you don't like the idea, your mind will be blown by this new stuff, and most people don't know it. But at the end of the book, I talk about, let's look at atheism. Let's look at the record of atheism. And the cruelty and the evil done in the name of atheism, okay? So atheists often pretend to be, we're neutral, we're secular. Well, that's not the record. We've had enough of decades of enforced atheism that show it to be more cruel than anything you've ever seen in your life. It's really wicked. It looks satanic. Even if you don't believe in that category, you'd say, well, this doesn't look like normal human evil. This looks really wicked. So you have this working its way through and working its way through. It wasn't until the 60s, in a sense, that some of these things, as I said, got purchased in American culture. And this is where you get this kind of anti-narrative that says America is bad. And not just that America has faults, because any human being knows, especially if you're some kind of Christian, you know I have faults. You know, and if you don't believe me, just ask my wife. She's right there, right? In other words, you have to acknowledge each of us has faults, and our nation has faults. So you acknowledge that. But it's another thing to say those faults define you, right? It would be like telling your kid, you know, you're just like your father, that bum. I hate you. You're never gonna improve. If a parent says that to a kid, they're cursing the child, right? Instead of saying, look, we've all got problems, and let's work on this together. And I want to say, attaboy when you get it right, or whatever. I mean, when we abolished slavery, you got to say to the United States of America, attaboy. That's pretty good that you were willing to abolish this thing, this horrible thing. When you abolish Jim Crow, whatever, you gotta give credit where it's due. Do we always have, we say, well, we're not perfect yet. Well, obviously we're not perfect yet, because we're all still human beings, we're in process. But a narrative crept in the 60s that began to focus on the negative kind of relentlessly. And it's kind of like when you see somebody beating you over the head with your faults, right? They're not loving you, they're cursing you. They're not saying, you have faults, but I love you and we can do better. And I'm gonna put my arm around you and we're gonna work on this and we're gonna get this right. Instead, they kind of rejoice in your faults. And they point their finger at you, not at themselves, right? So that narrative crept in the 60s. And basically, again, what's the narrative? Oh, the narrative is we were wrong on slavery, we were wrong to Native Americans, we were wrong. And you feel like saying, like, yeah, who didn't know that? And by the way, when you know you're wrong, you repent and you don't do it anymore, right? So that's a good thing. That's progress and that's a good thing. But there are certain people, and of course these voices are loud today in the critical race theory world, they don't want to hear the positive stuff. They just want to shake their finger and point at you how bad you are, how bad you are, how bad you are, whatever. That's the voice of the devil. That's not the voice of God, okay? So, because they don't want to acknowledge the possibility of repentance and redemption, which is beautiful. They want to focus on bad, 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 you're bad. So they're cursing instead of blessing. And again, we know what love looks like. Love calls us to be better. Cursing says you can never be better. That is the voice of the devil. Because it creates a fatalism and it breaks down. It's the enemy of American liberty. It's the enemy of what the Bible says. And so we know for about 50 years we've been dealing with that narrative, and it's worked its way through, like leavening, all through the lump, and here we are now dealing with crazy ideas that have worked their way in, which everyone knows are insane. Don't say like, oh, we're a divided country. Like 90% of the people in this country know that a rooster can't lay an egg. You need to be an ideological nut to think like, well, who's to say, if I cut some pieces off and put on some makeup, maybe, no, everybody knows that's cuckoo, but we live in a culture where people are afraid to acknowledge it as such, and I think there's no way to live this life of freedom, or a life of faith without courage. We have to have courage in the face of evil, and you speak the truth when it is not popular. You do the best you can, and that's why it's such an honor for me to be here among so many of you who do that. And when you do that, you encourage others to do that, and it's a beautiful thing, folks. I've written all these biographies, and I wrote a book called 7 Men and a book called 7 Women, and I realized that when you tell the stories of these heroes of the faith, or heroes in general, you inspire others to be heroic, because when you encounter that, you go like, whoa, I want to be like that. That's beautiful. And it's important that we acknowledge that each of us has that on us. People look at you, and they're either inspired in one direction or in another direction. And so our lives, we encourage people. When you are courageous, when you say the thing you shouldn't say, and you say it, other people are going, huh, I was thinking the same thing, but nobody said it. So maybe next time I will say it. I'm not afraid to say it because that guy said it. Well, that's kind of where we are. And God has allowed us to come to this moment where we have this, on the one hand, it's a burden and a responsibility. On the other hand, it's an extraordinary privilege. Who are we to see these things and to gather here? Who are we? We're not better. By God's grace, He's allowed us somehow to be His servants for these things we believe in at a time when it's particularly unfashionable. And those are always the beautiful stories, right? Some of you are familiar with the famous speech, the St. Crispin's Day speech in Henry V, in Shakespeare's Henry V. We happy few. We happy few, we band of brothers. There's something noble and beautiful about that. That who are you to gather? It's not the mob. It's we happy few that are called to this beautiful battle, and that's the mystery of God. How we do that, whether we win or lose. The idea that we would get to be on the right side of something and fight and live or die. It's an honor that we can never earn such an honor. It's a gift from God. In my book, If You Can Keep It, one of the things that startled me as I was writing it was Abraham Lincoln's understanding of the founder's vision. Abraham Lincoln understood it just about better than anyone. It's really astonishing how perfectly he, 7 years before, this was distant but not so distant. But he understood the concept of these things. There's a chapter on Lincoln in the book, really amazingly. And if God had not delivered a leader like Lincoln at that time, I cannot imagine where we are today. That's just another example of God's hand in our history. We ought not to have ever come into existence, much less existed 5 years or 90 or 100 or 200. It's amazing. And we're now at a crossroads where we have this battle in which we find ourselves. But I want to encourage you that, many of you have heard people talk about empires rise and fall. A lot of people that I would consider friends or agree with on most stuff, they say empires rise and fall, and they give you the kind of the cycle of empire and blah, 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 blah. Well, let me just tell you something. A lot of that is true, but here's one problem with that. There never in the history of the world has been another United States of America. So to compare us to, pick a group, the Roman Empire or whatever, fundamentally it doesn't work. Because at the heart of what we have, by God's grace, again, not because we're better, we're more wonderful, but by God's grace, what came into existence 250 years ago is a new thing. And it points to the God of the Bible, and it rests on the God of the Bible. Even if you don't believe in the God of the Bible, historically, you've never had anything like this. Self-government, genuine self-government. And again, we know that it goes away naturally unless we, the people, keep it. Unless we rehearse these stories and tell the stories of people who died for liberty, people who paid the ultimate price, and realize that we are meant to be those people as well. Now, if you're a Christian, you have a particular advantage in this, because you know that Jesus actually defeated death on the cross. That's not a metaphor. I mean, it's a metaphor, but it's also literally true. Therefore, you don't fear death. So if you want to know how Christian you are, I want to tell you, it's to the extent that you fear death that you're not a Christian, and you should worry about your soul. Because according to the Bible, the whole point is that when God defeated death on the cross, He opened the door for every single one of us to live eternally and freely, to never fear death. If you don't fear death, you're free. Bonhoeffer obviously believed in what the Bible said and in the God of the Bible and didn't fear death. But it's not some like magic trick. The reason he didn't fear death is he knew death had been defeated. He knew the moment he was killed, he would step into real life. He didn't hope. A lot of us hope these things are true. I want to encourage you not to hope any more than you hope that 1 + 1 = 2. If you hope that 1 + 1 = 2, you're kind of stupid. There's certain things you need to know, okay? It's okay to hope some things, but there's certain things that if you don't know they're true, they really have no value. So Bonhoeffer and many other heroes knew not to fear death, knew that because of God, truth wins in the end, and God decides when the end is. We don't decide. We don't say, oh, we're under judgment, it's over. You know, let's go back to the root cellars and we got our Slim Jims or water purifying tablets. Jesus will be back in 10 minutes. That's not the voice of God. God calls us to the fight. God calls us to fight. And so we have voices in our praise God. So when you hear people say, what's the use? There's nothing we can do. You need to inform them, excuse me, that's the voice of Satan speaking through you. I don't need to hear that garbage out of your mouth because that's not right. God decides when it's hopeless. And while there's breath in us, when we have a little bit of freedom, whatever freedom you have, whatever money you have, whatever voice you have, whatever energy you have, you use it for the purposes of freedom and truth. And when you don't have those things anymore, that God decides when you're done. But for you to say, well, I'm done, I'm retired, I'm going to play golf until Jesus returns. And I'm having a pretty good round, so I hope it's not till the 18th. A lot of people live that way. And I tell you, it's sad to me, because that's not the way to live. I want to leave time for Q&A. Again, it's just a joy for me to be here, and I just thank God for all of you. But I know we have some time for Q&A. I'm just happy if people want to just kind of pop up and ask questions. And also, I prefer true or false questions. So let me stop there, and I want to just give you as much time as I have. But I just and I am serious when I mean to say that I'm really happy to talk about anything. It doesn't matter what kind of questions you have, whether they are, stump me with a geography question or whatever it is. I really be delighted. So anyway, so let me pause there and let me say thank you, and let's move on to the Q&A. So I saw a hand over here, but I know that guy. Whatever. I'm not looking at my watch to know how much time we have, but I'll take as much time as you're willing to. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. I think we're all aware that there's court cases put in by the Brunson brothers.
What?
And
I think you're quite wrong in that. I'm not aware of that.
you're not aware?
No. You see, you are all more in the weeds than I am. I'm kind of at the stupid level. I sound smart because I'm up at the 50,000 grade. You guys are actually in the weeds fighting this battle. So what you're referring to, actually, I don't know about. But
Who knows about the Brunson case? Raise your hand.
okay, a lot of people.
Filed a case.
Can you repeat the
that
question?
could overturn the 2020 election
Right.
and return it to the winner, Trump.
Yeah.
So we're waiting, and I just wonder how people felt about that, or do you think they will?
Okay. Well, I have to say, I'm self-confident enough to admit my ignorance on things. I'm not afraid or insecure. So I'm going to say that I'm not aware of that, and so I don't know if there's somebody in the room who knows, who can speak briefly to the Brunson case or where it is, and if not, I'll just say a few words on that. Yes, sir.
Just briefly, the core of the...
Please stand up because I know people can't hear in the...
First of all, I pretend to be a lawyer and I'm not. The core of the case involves whether or not you take the oath of office seriously. Right? You have violated your oath of office, there should be consequences. That's my essential understanding of this.
But I don't really understand. When is this case happening? What's going on with the case?
Happening on this weekend.
Yeah, what happened, it was brought before the court on January 6th, and they rejected it. Why they rejected it, I don't know, but apparently I guess they appealed it, and they were getting a second chance with it.
Right. Okay, well, so anyway, this is a Connecticut thing, and I barely know. What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. So then, I'm even more ignorant than I thought. Or 50 times more ignorant than I thought. No, I think, listen, the short answer to that question is that there's a lot going on, and some people are aware of it and some people aren't. One of the reasons I have a national radio program and do what I do is because our principal battle is in disseminating information. If most Americans are unaware of these things, if most Americans are ignorant of everything we in this room know, then how do we get the word out? And so let me ask you to go to my website, ericmetaxas.com, and sign up for my newsletter, because I interview people who are knowledgeable about these things every day. I'm on 2 hours every weekday across the country, and if you go to ericmetaxas.com and sign up, you'll get the Rumble videos, since I was canceled off of YouTube, because obviously I have a potty mouth, and the Marxist people, they didn't approve of my language. No, so I don't know. Honestly, there's a lot here, but it's, to me, about information, about how do you get the word out. And we all know that so much of the country, either they watch CNN or they still think the New York Times is worth reading. They have no idea of what we know. So a big part of our job is to get the word out on these things however we can. So in any event, who next asks? Yes, sir. What's that? He's a friend of mine. I don't want him to talk. No, go ahead, and then we'll get to my friend.
I want to ask you about a book of yours that you did not mention in your speech, but you're selling it out there. Letter to the American Church. I run the Family Institute of Connecticut. We are being inundated by phone calls from local lay people here in Connecticut who have read your book, are very inspired by it, and are beside themselves that the churches that they belong to, evangelical, faithful, conservative churches, are not rising up.
Of course not.
These issues.
Yeah.
So I wonder, because to me, listening to your speech, what underlies American freedom and democracy is the churches.
Yes.
Could you speak to that?
Well, sure. Basically, some of you know I wrote a book about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran pastor who, in the 30s, began speaking, because of his faith, speaking against Hitler and understanding that the church has to be the conscience of the state. So he was not an American, but he understood this concept, right? That the church is severed from the state, that the church has fidelity to the God of the Bible, not to the state. And so he got that, and he was trying to wake up the German church in the early 30s, that if they don't stand together against Hitler, the evil that comes in, God will lay that at their feet. It is the job of the church. I said it before. If you believe Jesus defeated, you claim to be a Christian, you claim to believe Jesus defeated death on the cross, and you don't fear death. So you're going to live freely and boldly and courageously because you know that you can't outgive God. You know that you'd be a fool to be cowering, and you'd know that. Well, today, what is happening in America, and the book Letter to the American Church, I make the case, I just have to tell you that it's not my opinion. This is very clear that the silence of the American church, the inaction of the American church, particularly evangelical churches I can point my finger at, because they claim really to believe this stuff. We're not talking about the dead mainline churches with the flags. We're talking about people who actually claim to believe what the Bible says, and they have been guilty of silence. Why? For exactly the same reason the German churches gave. Now let's be clear. In many cases we're talking about good people who are misunderstanding something profound. And this is the nightmare, is that a lot of good people, good pastors in Germany, okay? We're not talking about the ones that worship Hitler. We're talking about good guys who bought a couple of lies. And those are exactly the same lies that American evangelical leaders are buying today. What are the lies? The lie is that, Romans 13, we're supposed to obey the governing authorities, we don't comment on anything political, we just kind of do what they tell us. Well, what kind of an idiot do you have to be in the United States of America to not understand we the people are the governing authorities? And this idea that we're supposed to obey Rome or Caesar, I mean, again, if you're so ignorant of history that you cannot process this piece of the problem, that you have been given a gift. You don't live in first century Rome. You've been given a gift to govern yourselves, and therefore you have a responsibility to govern yourselves. And therefore, the church in particular has a responsibility to speak the truth and to point out corruption and evil and on and on and on, to speak against transgender madness destroying children and families, to speak against critical race theory, to speak against these things that are Marxist, atheist in origin and are false and are destroying communities of color. If you actually care about communities of color, you're going to speak against BLM from the pulpits. But the point is, we have a lot of churches today, a lot of it is just fear and cowardice in many cases. But many of them still have this kind of theological veneer that I am not getting involved because I'm supposed to stay in my little theological lane. Now you understand that, again, that's the voice of the devil telling you to stay in the theological lane. You can go to churches like that in China, okay? Where you go in there, your little weird little building, do your rituals on Sunday morning, but when you come out, you bow to the secular authority of the state. In America, we got something else. We're supposed to be able to exercise our faith when we leave the building on Sunday morning. We're supposed to live out our faith 24/7 in every sphere in which we go. So this misunderstanding that a lot of cowardly or ignorant Christian leaders have bought into, I wrote the book Letter to the American Church to say to them, you're misunderstanding something deep and critical. And if you want to know how Germany and Europe went to hell in the 30s, you need to understand it is precisely how we are going to hell this minute for the exact same reasons. The only difference is we have far less excuse than the German churches had. And I believe God, in His mysterious mercy, is giving us an opportunity to not go down this path. If we look at what happened in the story of Bonhoeffer in Germany, we see exactly what happened when German churches bought these lies and why they bought the lies. You know, what are the lies? I mean, at the heart of it is this idea that, well, it's all about faith. I don't need to do anything. It's all about faith. That's a complete misunderstanding of faith. All right? The title of my book is Letter to the American Church. I was going to title it Faith Without Works is Dead. Because if you claim to have faith but aren't living out your faith, according to God, you don't have faith. And if you don't have faith, you might be going to hell forever. You should be concerned about that. So this idea that we talk about faith, or Bonhoeffer calls it cheap grace, and like, I don't have to do anything, I'm just saved by faith, I'm good. Or I'm a Catholic, I'm baptized, I'm good. That's not what God says. What God says is faith without works is dead. And you are obliged until the day you see Him face to face to live out your faith. And in this day and age, when we're facing evil on every front, much of that will be political. We have to get involved politically. Now, there are many other things you can get involved in. Politics is, if you don't like politics, there's a million other things. But we are called, first of all, as Americans, to keep the republic. This is what's involved in preserving liberty, is being active. And if your Christian faith prevents you from doing that, it's not an actual Christian faith. It's a false, cowardly pseudo-faith. And I will say, by the way, if you go to a church that doesn't get this, first thing you should do is plan to leave that church and to take your money and all your friends with you. because the time is really, really short. We don't have 5 years. We don't have 10 years. Like, this is now. Like, this is it. And there are people who really don't understand the urgency of it. They still kind of want to go back to, I don't know, maybe they think Tip O'Neill's the head of the Democratic Party, probably.
Is that enough?
They don't understand, like, we kind of moved on. We're dealing with Marxist, atheist nuts who hate America, okay? JFK and others in the Democratic Party did not hate America. They loved America, and we had some differences. But let me tell you, where we are now, you have to be alive to where you are now. And that's what Bonhoeffer was trying to do in the German church. He's saying, like, hey, guys, Kaiser is no longer the head of the state. Kaiser was a good guy. He liked the church. He was a Christian. The head of the state is now a guy called Adolf Hitler, who will not claim to be a satanic atheist, but he will say he's some kind of a Christian or he's for the church or whatever. But I'm here to tell you that if you read his book and you look at the policies he's enacting, they are 100% opposed to what we in the church believe, so we are obliged by our faith, if we have faith, to stand against him. Bonhoeffer said this over and over and over, and then fell on deaf ears in the German church. And we can look at that and see what happened. And I'm here to tell you, this is the short version, that exactly what happened then is happening now. There are people today who call themselves Christians, many Christian leaders, who actually believe that we're supposed to be silent in the face of these evils, that that's not my thing. I'm supposed to stick to, quote unquote, just preaching the gospel. Well, my question is, what kind of a dead, useless gospel do you preach that you will not speak against evil? And so I always say to people, you know, by all means, give a copy of my book. I can sign it to a pastor, and I do this lovingly. I write, God bless you. And that, because there are many people, I want to be clear, there are many people out there who will get this if they read the book, or at some point they'll wake up. There are people waking up right now. It's part of why we're here. There's people waking up across this country like, we get it, we get it. We've been suckers, we've been silent. Boy, what do we do now, right? So I want to graciously reach out to these people. But I'm saying, but if they refuse to get it, get out of that church and give your money and your time to someone who does get this, because we are in a war against evil and against tyranny. So yeah, that's my latest book. It's Letter to the American Church, shortest book I ever wrote. This gentleman and then this gentleman.
Great to see you again. I'll say my question is more a question. Can you stand up?
Would you stand up? And if you don't mind, sing a few bars of My Funny Valentine. Just because we're friends, I can ask that of you. Okay.
Have you observed that the left is using the tools and symbols of the church to promulgate their views?
Right. This is a philosophical question, and I'll repeat it for those who didn't hear it. If a woodchuck could chuck wood. Excuse me. No, the question is, am I aware of the fact that the secular left is using the language of the church? Look, this is basic theology, okay? Only God can create. So all the devil can do is pervert truth, twist truth, bend reality. So he's a negating force, to quote Goethe. So if you think about it, whenever anybody on the secular left or the AOC, Marxist, atheist left, or whatever, any of those people, they say, like, I'm against racism. You want to say to them, oh, excuse me too. Except I know why I'm against it, because the God of the Bible says we're all created in his image equal, he's no respecter of persons, yada, yada, yada. I know why I am against racism as evil. But you, tell me, why are you against it? In other words, if you don't believe in the God of the Bible, why are you against it? Now the point is, they have no answer. They will give you a lot of verbiage and try to fool you. But the point is, if you believe that there's no God, and we evolved by accident out of the primordial soup, and boom, here we are, there's no such thing as good or evil, period. much less the specific evil of racism, because you'd say, well, who's to say? It seems to me that some nationalities, some races are more evolved than others. And why don't we follow the science? That's what it says. Right? So the Nazis said, the Nazis are more evolved than the Jews and the Slavs and whatever, and that's just science. If you believe in Darwinian evolution apart from God, tell me why racism is even wrong, much less why you pretend to be against it. But they can't do that. All they can do is gaslight you and pretend like, I'm against it. And they say, well, again, that's really sweet that you got that right, but can you tell me why? It's kind of like somebody says, like, I got the right answer on the math problem. You say, can you show me your work? I'd like to see your work. Did you just copy that from your neighbor? And the answer is yes, they just copied it from their neighbor. They get their ideas about equality and racism and justice and whatever. If you are a Marxist atheist, where do you get those ideas from? There is nowhere from which to get those ideas, but they don't want you to know that. And so that's exactly correct, is that they are talking this game, but all they can do is try to bluster and bully and cancel, and if you bring these things up, they'll try to cancel you and shut you up, because they're scared to death that they will be revealed as having no ideas. Now listen, if you don't believe in good and evil, if you don't believe in the God of the Bible, all you care about is power.
Yeah.
That is a satanic agenda.
Yes, it is.
That I want power. What can I say to get power? Whom can I cancel or bully or silence or crush to get more power? That's the enemy of American-style self-government. It's the enemy of the God of the Bible. But they use the language, as we've just said, they use the language because everybody will nod along with the language. Yes, racism is bad. Yes, yes. Marginalized people need our respect. Yes, yes. Well, where do you get those ideas? They have no idea where they get those ideas, and they have no idea that what they believe at the heart of it is against those ideas. So they're playing a game, and we need to be clear that I've become bolder and bolder in my faith, because the more you learn, the more you just think, this is ridiculous. Like my book is Atheism Dead. When I wrote that book, I kind of blew my mind, because I thought to myself, nobody knows. The evidence for God is so overwhelming. You know when people act like, well, there's evidence for God. That's like saying there's evidence that the world is not flat. Like, really? Is this a debate? If you think the world is flat, you got to see me after class, because you're misinformed. And there are people that are misinformed even on that. But the fact of the matter is, when it comes to the evidence for God, in our lifetimes, the evidence for God from science has become completely overwhelming. Like, forget about it, to the point where it's hard to believe that this was even possible, because we all bought this narrative lie that science is on the march and faith is being pushed out. Well, if the God of the Bible invented the universe and created the universe out of nothing, it seems to me that science eventually is going to point us in his direction, and you're going to look like a fool if you expected the opposite, and a lot of people are going to look like fools when they So to me, these things that we're talking about, they become clearer and clearer. As evil becomes bolder and bolder, God's evidence for himself and for everything we're talking about becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. You could live in a different world 30 or 40 years ago, but today, the left has outed itself as on board with whatever lunacy you want. And we need to understand, most people in America see this, but they're kind of looking around for leadership. And there are plenty of churches around this country who, when they're bold about all this stuff, including the political stuff, agnostics are flocking to those churches. They're like, we didn't have churches like that when I was a kid. Well, we do now. People are talking about these kinds of things now, and the evidence is overwhelming, and we need to be bolder, because what we believe is true. And I think that when things go crazy, there's a hunger for the truth that didn't exist 10 years ago, 20 years ago. There are people looking around thinking things are going insane. Is anybody tracking? And we ought to be tracking. We ought to be talking about this. And we ought to be increasing our numbers. Yes, sir?
Pretty much everyone in the center and on the right sees that the school systems we have are involved in progressive secularistic indoctrination from beginning to end.
Right.
Is it hopeless?
Are the public schools hopeless?
No, I just schools.
Schools in general. Yeah, I mean, I think, again, we should be a little bit ahead of the curve, right? In other words, it's like, let's get ahead of the curve and understand that everything that we took for granted a few decades ago is dead. It's over, right? In other words, I used to read the New York Times and say, well, I know it leans left. It leans secular left. It is now Pravda. It is a dead, useless, propagandistic rag that should be mocked and ignored. Or better yet, just ignored. Seriously. I mean, but I'm saying, like, it's hard for some people to do that. Because, well, I've always read the New York Times. I do the crossword puzzle. Well, good for you. But, like, Satan has a gun pointed at your head, and maybe you're going to look up from the crossword puzzle and, like, get involved in the battle with us here. And Yale University, I mean, there's a part of me that I know every time people say, "Ever go to Yale University?" Some people go, "Oh, they're very impressed." Yale is a seminary of Satan. Yale University is like a joke. I mean, it's so hilarious to me. Now, listen to this. Yale, okay, was bad in the late 40s when William F. Buckley attended, and he wrote "God and Man at Yale" in 51 or whatever about the Yale of the 40s, how communists and atheists had taken over much of the faculty. That's the story of the elites in America. They worked their way in more and more and more, and it was there in the 80s when I was there, and they are now flipped out super nuts. So when people say, "Look, oh, I sent my kid to a prestigious school," like the world is going to end in 10 minutes. And you're worried about that? Like, you actually think that you're going to send your kid to one of these Marxist, insane institutions so that they can be indoctrinated with your money, and they're going to graduate and they're going to have some fine life with their Yale degree? Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't wake up to the reality today that is the best people out there that I know didn't go to college or went to some college you haven't heard of. These things, again, it's kind of like the devil is a liar, okay? And we can and people on the Marxist left, they can only lie and pretend. It's exactly at the end of my book, Led to the American Church, I talk about Reagan when he gave his famous speech at the Brandenburg Gate, and he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," right? The rhinos at the time, the establishment people at the time, all these great Republicans, Colin Powell and James Baker, and we used to love all those guys. Remember those guys? They all said to him, "Oh, Mr. Reagan, Mr. President, you cannot say, tear down this wall." Why? Because a couple of reasons. The same reason that people hate Trump today. If you say those things, we might need to, we might need to deal with this evil. We would rather play patty cake with the devil. Détente. Let's have détente. Let's not confront the evil. Let's just, we'll agree to disagree while people are perishing in the Soviet gulags. Who cares? Reagan said, "No, I'm going to speak the truth. I'm going to acknowledge the reality that the Soviet Union today is faking it. Their economy is in ruins. And if we just give one push all together, that whole Iron Curtain is going to come down, or might come down. Are you with me?" And a lot of the people around him said, "Oh, well, no, sir, that's very unpresidential, and we don't want you to do that. We would rather serve Satan than do anything embarrassing." Well, that's the story of good and evil, folks. You're going to have a leader like a Reagan who's going to say, "We need to fight. And we could even lose. We need to fight." And everybody else is going to say, no, we can get along. So what if China is murdering Uyghur Muslims for their organs and selling the organs? We can make a lot of money working with China. It's a big market. We don't care about truth or evil. We just want to make a buck. We're whores. We don't care about anything except power and money. They're not going to put it that way. But let me tell you something. When you're facing evil and you say, "Well, I'm going to look the other way," you are looking the other way in the way that people made a ton of money off the slave trade. People made a ton of money working with Nazi Germany. people made a ton of money working with China. We could see the greed in the 90s. We're going to give the most favored nation status and the free market, and we're all going to get rich. It's going to be great. That's our temptation. But at the heart of everything, we have to acknowledge truth. And when you acknowledge truth, you say, this is dead and this is pretending to be alive. So the New York Times wants to pretend. They're living off of fumes. To get back to the schools, the original question, they're pretending like, no, we're still operating here. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but do you know how insanely, dramatically homeschooling has rocketed in the last few years? Because many heroic parents have acknowledged that my children are not only not learning much in the schools, and by the way, this goes for private schools, not just public schools, for private schools and quite a few Christian, quote-unquote, schools, okay? So parents have said, you know what, at my worst, I can do better than that. Because even if I sleep on the couch all day, I'm not teaching them Marxism. So the fact of the matter is that we need to get real, and we need to understand, just as Reagan understood, the Soviet Union is a propped up corpse. And if we fight, we can push it down. Who's with me? Margaret Thatcher, John Paul the Great. Who's with me? Lech Walesa. Who's with me in this battle? But all the rhinos and Foggy Bottom and the people that we thought were good Republicans, they couldn't care less. They were making money. They didn't care. And I'm just here to tell you folks, we're in that battle today. Let's declare the dead dead, and let us bolster those institutions where there really is hope and where there is life. And so, and again, I have to always make the caveat that if God has called you to be a teacher in a public school environment and you know that He's using you there, well then you stay there, right? Because this is not a monolithic thing. But by and large, most of the places that we thought of as, well, there's hope, or I'm going to work here, I'm going to work at the UN, there's some people there listening to what I have to say. That I think we would be much better served running from those churches, from those institutions, from those places, and understanding the hour that we're in. That if we don't go to help those who are in the heat of the battle, to the battlefront, if we don't help them, whether it's in homeschooling, wherever it is, then we're actually helping the enemy. And so it's a huge question. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Dana Benson. I'm from Easton, and I wanted to make two comments and ask a question. You may not be aware of this, but in Connecticut, we have a group that's been extremely effective at influencing housing policy and land use policy called Desegregating Connecticut. And their vision for Connecticut, and they are certainly Marxist atheists, is that the entire state should have half-acre lots. In other words,
I love Ron DeSantis, but if I was alone with him in a room, I would say to him that this is not your time, and that if you are politically smart, which he doesn't seem to be enough, you need to know that the smartest thing you could ever do is put yourself 100% behind Donald Trump to support him now. And I'm extremely familiar with the arguments that say, is Reagan, see, I did it. You did it. He fooled me. Is Trump electable and da-da-da-da-da. I would say absolutely yes. Because you live in Connecticut, you are not as familiar as I am with there are, so many millions of people in this country who have derived hope from Trump in a way that we have never seen in our lives. To the point where he makes Reagan look a little like Jimmy Carter. And I think we live at a time when the news media, including the conservative news media, doesn't, that's the working class men and women of this country had a champion in him like nothing they ever dreamt of. and they have a love for him. And so I think that, listen, if DeSantis is the nominee, I will do everything I could conceivably do, because he's a great man. But I think that we're going to go through the cycle now where everybody's talking about is Trump electable and stuff. And I think that Trump, I hope, will be humbled in this, because we know that he needs humbling, a couple of shots to the head to make him realize that he's not God or anything like that, and that that he needs to, understand when to be moderate and when to be radical and stuff. So I think that we just have, I guess this must be the final question. But in all seriousness, I really do think he is a heroic figure, and with all of his tremendous flaws, has, I think Christians would call it like an anointing on him. You don't deserve such a thing. He doesn't deserve it. But I think that that he has a gifting and something that I really do believe that he is electable, because he has this warrior quality that is now, again, I say this, I'm happy to be wrong in the sense that I don't care, as long as it's not like some horrible rhino neocon like Nikki Haley or Mike Pompeo or Mike Pence. I think these folks are, they were once sort of on our side, but I think they don't understand where we are. And that's kind of the key. If you don't understand where we are, if you're not angry about what happened to the J6 people and you're not talking about that, I really don't have much that I want to hear from you. And I think that Trump, with all his manifest flaws, is the man. If someone else emerges, I think that, listen, part of what has happened, and I just have to say this in closing, honestly, part of what has happened through the craziness of the election fraud and all of this madness, it's woken a lot of people up who were sleeping. And I think that those people are across the board. I think a lot of people that were Democrats, a lot of people, whatever, they're just woken up and said, what is going on? And I think that what's coming out about the vaccines, what's coming out, all this stuff is going to come out more and more and more and more. This is by the grace of God that is coming out. And I think that we are in a moment right now where people are realizing increasingly, wow, we're in a battle with evil. This is not, we're not in a battle with Democrats, we're in a battle with evil and to fight for humanity. And so I feel emphatically that Trump will emerge that way, that it is his time, and I hope by the grace of God we will get 2 terms of DeSantis and anyone else. There's whether it's Kerry Lake or there's so many. What I meant to say really is that there's so many heroes that have emerged in this time, and we know who they are, and some of them have been elected or re-elected to Congress. And if we hadn't been through this hell, they would still be minor voices. We wouldn't be listening to them. Some of you have watched Lauren Boebert, giving it to the people at Twitter, giving it to there are people that are angry, and Jim Jordan and so many others are heroes. So I don't know the details, but I want to encourage you that however we can fight, let's fight. We have to put our faith in God. He is the one who determines how this all works out. But He created us in His image for such a time as this. He created us for this battle now, and if we will rise to this occasion and fight as He's called us to fight, I think you cannot imagine how many people are going to get behind you and they're looking to you. So I will, I'll be quiet now. I will sign books until I have to leave. But I want to say again, I'm so grateful to every one of you who is here, and to those of you who pulled this together. God is with you, and I want you to be deeply encouraged as you move forward. God bless you.
Metaxas, everyone.